Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Thursday, April 20th. This is Africa 54. Renewed fighting rattles Sudan's capital as residents try to flee the capital on the eve of the Eid holiday, marking the end of Ramadan. An Islamic community in California uses the Muslim holy month of Ramadan to raise awareness about domestic violence. And U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin meets with Swedish counterpart in Stockholm in a rare visit intended to show Washington's support for Sweden's bid to join NATO. This and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The Sudanese government military says it is ruling out any negotiations with the rival paramilitary Rapid Support Forces to end the crisis gripping the country. A statement from the military on Thursday says that engaging in talks with the RSF will not be possible unless it's to discuss their surrender. The latest attempt at a 24-hour ceasefire between Sudan's warring forces has failed, and residents of Khartoum reported renewed heavy gunfire Thursday over central Khartoum and other areas as many residents tried to flee the city on the eve of the Eid holiday, marking the end of the holy month of Ramadan. Khartoum, Omdurman and Bahri have been rocked by fierce battles this week between the army and the RSF. Many residents of Khartoum are worried about dwindling food supplies and a breakdown in medical services. Christy Kilburn has more.
Thick smoke was seen in the skies of Khartoum on Wednesday after the latest ceasefire attempt between Sudanese troops and paramilitary forces failed, leaving people worried about dwindling food supplies and a breakdown in medical services. The 24-hour ceasefire was lobbied for by countries trying to evacuate their citizens. It was to come into effect at 6 p.m. local time, but two eyewitnesses in separate areas of the Sudanese capital told Reuters that fighting had continued. Hundreds of people have been killed since the violence erupted. Thousands have been injured. This doctor at the Sudanese Ministry of Health says that most of the big, specialized hospitals are out of service.
The hospitals now serving the wounded are so few, with a limited number of doctors, so there's overcrowding of the wounded. Besides, not all the injured can arrive to the hospitals under the gunfire. They cannot even arrive to receive medical care. We honestly need public and private hospitals to open up to provide medical services for all the injured and for all patients.
Many of Sudan's best hospitals are concentrated in central Khartoum, where the most intense fighting is taking place. 9 hospitals in Sudan have been hit by artillery and 16 forcibly evacuated since the fighting began, the Sudanese Doctors Union said. The World Health Organization's regional head, Ahmad al-Mandari, said he doubts the health system will survive given the conditions. United Nations spokesman Stéphane Dujarric.
Nearly 1/3 of the population was already in need of humanitarian aid at the start of the year. Now our humanitarian colleagues are warning that people in Sudan are running out of food, they are running out of fuel, and they're running out of other vital supplies.
Christy Kilburn of Reuters filed that report. The humanitarian situation in Sudan is becoming more dire by the day, and for more insight on the role United Nations is taking in the Northeast African country, let's go live to New York, where VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir is standing by. Hello, Margaret. Please tell us what the UN Secretary General says about the conflict in Sudan, and has he made any progress on a ceasefire?
Well, he just moments ago came before the cameras at UN headquarters, Esther. He had a meeting this morning by telephone, a virtual meeting, with the heads of the Arab League, the African Union, IGAD, and representatives from the European Union and several other countries that are influential in Sudan, they agreed, they condemned the fighting, and they're calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities. For his part, the Secretary General made a personal appeal for a 3-day ceasefire to cover the Eid al-Fitr holiday, which is about to start imminently in Sudan and the rest of the Muslim world. He said it's vital for people to be able to get food and to get medical attention, to get out of harm's way. Many civilians are trying to escape the fighting, particularly in the capital. He hopes that a temporary ceasefire could lead to a permanent one, and that could lead to talks. And he said it's absolutely vital that Sudan get back on track to the civilian transition and appoint a civilian-led government. So he said he's going to be putting the full force of his good offices behind this effort, but no concrete ceasefire yet.
Margaret, do we know if UN agencies are still operating in Sudan, even though the fighting continues?
Well, Antonio Guterres just said it is absolutely virtually impossible for aid operations to go on. And he also made an appeal for the parties to stop targeting humanitarian workers. We've seen 3 World Food Program staff members killed over the weekend. 2 were injured in Darfur. The UN's humanitarian air service has airplanes that deliver aid across Sudan. They've all been grounded, and one of the planes has been damaged, I believe, beyond repair at Khartoum airport. The WFP has also had 10 vehicles stolen, 6 food trucks stolen, and 4,000 tons of food stolen from its warehouse in Niala in Darfur. So it's a really tragic situation because even before the fighting erupted, there were nearly 16 million people in need of humanitarian assistance in Sudan. So this is just going to further complicate efforts and deprive a lot of people who are really in need of assistance from getting it.
What about the hospitals?
Right. Well, we heard a little bit of that in Krista's report. The Sudan Ministry of Health updated today. They said now 20 hospitals have been closed. I heard about 9 yesterday had been closed in Khartoum, the rest elsewhere. The UN said yesterday that 16 more were in jeopardy of closing, and it's due to the fighting and security, staff shortages, and supply shortages. In fact, there was a big appeal for blood. So it's a big problem. Dr. Tedros, who heads the World Health Organization, he spoke to reporters today also. He said there are more than 330 people dead now, more than 3,200 wounded. He also pointed to these attacks on healthcare facilities. And the UN has warned that Sudan's health system could collapse if things continue in this direction.
Does the UN, right.
Sorry.
Does the UN have any reports of people fleeing Sudan?
Yes, the UN Refugee Agency said today that between 10 and 20,000 people have already fled into Chad. As you know, in eastern Chad, there are already more than 400,000 Sudanese who are refugees there. So this is putting stress on an already stretched resources. So it's a complicated situation all around, Esther.
Margaret, thanks. VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bishia reporting live for us from New York. Researchers say tomato farmers in Ghana are good at growing tomatoes, but poor at storage. But some growers are discovering how to give their tomatoes a longer life. Hamza Adams from Kumasi has this report narrated by Salem Solomon.
Kuaku Botang Nana has had a long and successful career in the tomato industry. But he says more farmers are quitting the business due to post-harvest losses.
Whenever it rains, our tomatoes get rotten. Close to 80% of tomato farmers in this community have stopped cultivating their lands due to post-harvest losses.
Poor pricing and improper storage cause tomatoes to go bad before they can get to market. Recent reports by the Danish government show that Ghana loses $1.9 billion annually because of these kinds of post-harvest losses. Ghana's Crop Research Institute can't build better roads or improve storage facilities, but they can make tomatoes last longer. They're doing this by training young people from tomato-producing communities to prepare tomato jam, which has a longer shelf life.
Their parents will not bring the whole fruit to the urban market for the market queens to decide the prices, but they will take some part of it and turn it into jam or other product that we have taught them, and then that one will sell higher than they sending the raw fruit to the market. So this training is going to help those in the rural areas.
Young people are embracing the idea.
It's going to be very, very helpful to us in that we are from villages which do not have any knowledge in post-harvest techniques. So a lot of their produce and our produce goes to loss.
With these preservation methods and an emphasis on limiting food waste, more Ghanaian farmers hope they can stay in business and help feed the country for generations. For Hamza Aden in Akomadan, Ghana, Salam Solomon, VOA News.
We'd like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, an Islamic community in the U.S. state of California is raising awareness about domestic violence. We'll be right back.
From around the world. Let's go.
Just Jackson. In other news, Africa's first mRNA vaccine hub has been launched, and it's being seen as a historic shift to help poor countries gain access to life-saving shots. The Cape Town project is administered by South African biopharmaceutical company BioVac, the biotechnology firm Afrigen, and the South African Medical Research Council. A Kenyan judge has ruled that Facebook's parent company Meta can be sued in Kenya after 43 moderators at its Nairobi hub last month filed a lawsuit against the group and its local partner Sama for unfair termination. The moderators say they were fired in retaliation for complaints about working conditions and attempts to form a union. And Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni summoned ruling party lawmakers to a meeting to discuss anti-gay legislation that is being sharply condemned by the international community and human rights campaigners. Sources close to Museveni's office say they expect Museveni to reject the current draft of the bill and return it to Parliament for reconsideration. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and his Swedish counterpart held talks outside Stockholm Wednesday in a rare visit intended to show Washington's support for Sweden's bid to join NATO. VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Bob is traveling with the secretary and reports from a Swedish naval base.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin watches Swedish military demonstrations aboard a sleek Corvette warship in the Baltic Sea. The first visit to Sweden by a U.S. Defense Secretary in more than 2 decades. The rising interest in Swedish military might intended as a show of American support for Sweden's accession to NATO.
And to be clear, we look forward to that to happen before the summit in July. So we encourage our allies, Turkey and Hungary, to ratify Sweden's accession as soon as possible.
Swedish Defense Minister Pål Johnson said the country would only grow stronger as part of the alliance.
Sweden feels more secure now after we became invitee to NATO, and we think that we can provide the alliance with strategic depth and make it also better and more effective ways also in order to show deterrence and defense, not at least when it comes to the Baltic states and then Finland.
Sweden has military caves and a myriad of islands scattered across the Baltic Sea. Important assets for defending NATO allies in the region should an adversary like Russia attack.
So if that ever came to such a scenario, you'd want the NATO alliance to have the upper hand in the Baltic Sea. And for that reason, Sweden's, position is central.
Sweden and neighboring Finland, which became a NATO member earlier this month, asked to join the alliance after watching Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. Analysts say Russia hoped to fracture the alliance, but NATO allies and partners who hope to soon become allies say the alliance is stronger than ever. Carla Babb, VOA News, Moscow Naval Base, Sweden.
During Ramadan, an Islamic community in California is raising awareness about domestic violence. Genia Dulal has the story of a domestic violence shelter for Muslim immigrants in San Diego.
Jamila Granza packs Ramadan food boxes for families in need to break their fast.
We'll make sure that everybody has the same amount of blessing during Ramadan, and we can focus on prayers. So we don't focus on what am I going to provide my family for iftar after all day fasting.
It is part of Ramadan at San Diego's mosque, Masjidul Taqwa, where Islamic leaders are helping Granza spread awareness about a shelter for Muslim immigrant women escaping domestic violence.
The stigma that we bring from our hometown is still attached so much so in our daily life, right? That so much so that we usually don't speak about our own domestic violence that we experience, because back at home those are considered normal, right? So then we lack of knowledge on what is your right in this country.
Sabrina asked VOA not to use her last name for security reasons because her husband is still in the area. She says she came to California from Bangladesh in 2021 on a visa her husband got as a data analyst. Sabrina says he took her passport, would not allow her to have a cell phone, and regularly kept her locked in the house. She says she was pregnant when he attacked her. Sabrina requested that VOA not show her entire face.
He was drunk, very drunk at night, and he just lost his sense, I guess. Or I don't know how to justify that, honestly, because to me now there is no justification for that. And yeah, he slammed me around the house and punched me in my belly, basically. And yeah, that was the time when I had enough, and I actually called the ambulance, not the police, and they came with the police. And then he was arrested.
Sabrina gave birth in March to a daughter, Samara, which in Arabic means protected by God. Unlike Sabrina, Granza says many immigrant Muslim women do not speak English, which makes it even more difficult to leave abusers.
They are afraid because the abuser might threaten them with, immigrations, or I'm gonna send you back home. And home might not be an option for her. So then she accepts the abuse over and over again.
All 6 beds at the Islamic Circle of North America shelter here are occupied. Granza says the goal is to help abused immigrant women become self-sufficient in their new country. Sabrina is working on her immigration status and says she wants to go to school to learn how to help women in similar trouble. Genia Dulal for VOA News, San Diego.
Zimbabweans in the agriculture sector are dealing with rising fertilizer costs and poor rainfalls due to climate change. Now, some are turning to organic farming and conservation agriculture to make ends meet. Columbus Mavunga has more from Mashava, one of Zimbabwe's poorest and most drought-prone districts.
Zimbabwe farmer Nelson Mudzingwa says he hasn't used non-organic fertilizers for his trees and plants for 10 years. Instead, he depends on animal manure and dead leaves to fertilize the soil for his crops and fruit trees. He says sustainable farming that works with nature, known as agroecology, is cheaper, and that's not all.
We need to save our soils. The soils are very important for us because they produce food for us. And they must be fed, and they must continue to live, not to die as a result of our intervention. We will not need to poison ourselves. We would want to feed ourselves with organic material that we collect from our farms.
In this dry area, Mudzingwa harvests rain to ensure he has enough water for his plants and animals. Joseph Mandinyenya is an agroecology specialist with the non-profit development group Voluntary Service Overseas. He has trained about 400 farmers in agroecology as the threat of climate change grows.
It can actually climate-proof the negative effects of climate change. Also, agroecology produces healthy foods, and it also makes use of the naturally available resources that are within the farmer's proximity.
Zimbabwe's government hopes agroecology soon moves to other dry areas to ensure food security in those households. Godfrey Chipinda is chief economist in Zimbabwe's Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water, Climate and Rural Development.
It's also in support with the program that we are implementing as government, which is conservation agriculture from Vudza Intwasa. And I think it comes at the right time where we are preaching a message as a government that we need to restore our ecosystem. We need to test our soil. We need to make sure that everything that we do is agroecology.
Officials say the sustainable farming plan called the Pfumvudza Intwasa program can help Zimbabwe withstand the effects of climate change like drought. And with the high cost of fertilizers and irrigation, the government is pushing for more Zimbabweans to use agroeconomy to ensure they have enough food in the future. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Mashava, Zimbabwe.
People with disabilities are no less humans. This is what a Zimbabwean film producer says. Nyarazo Nyari Mashaya Mombe's film Even Our Dreams features actors and actresses with physical challenges. And for more on the film, Mashaya Pombe, who is a human rights advocate and storyteller, joins me live via Skype from Harare, Zimbabwe. Nyari, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much. Hello, world.
First of all, tell us, what led you to produce this movie?
Thank you. So I would like to just acknowledge my friends who work in a community that is supporting people with disabilities. And so they were hosting a Paralympic Games. And an idea came that I'm a storyteller with my initiative Identities Media. And why I'm a storyteller as a human and women's rights advocate is that we raise the voices that are often left out. So when the opportunity arose, I figured that it is an opportunity to tell the story of these people, but most importantly, bringing out the usually not so spoken about, celebrating some of their capacities, their buoyancy, they're thriving. A lot of them are thriving, but they also have challenges. So my film was to bring out the other areas that we don't talk about their love. A number of people in this film talk about the experiences with love, just like people who are able-bodied. So I wanted to focus on an area to celebrate, to change the stereotypes so that people can actually view people with disabilities with another eye, to celebrate also some of the things that they can do, that their brains that can raise a nation, they can contribute to the development of our nation and the world at large.
Nyari, you know, a lot of people just look at others with physical challenges and probably just dismiss them. What's one thing you learned working with these actors and actresses in your film that perhaps surprised you?
I think the issue of love stuck with me. So in Africa, or in Southern Africa, there's a term that we call mjolo. It talks about love, the difficulty, and the young people have coined it, mjolo is a pandemic, to say love is a pandemic, because it's difficult to find love. But in this community, they also, the same issues that people, they are in love. There are people who have really fallen deeply in love, and some have become victims of love, and others are looking for love. So those are some of the things that, you know what, we are not different, but also to just look at their intellectuals, as well as a guy called Christopher. Christopher has capacity, he's got resources. It's not everybody who has a disability who is poor. Christopher is the head of cattle. So those are some of the things that especially love in their capacities, and actually that some of them have resources. They are not as poor as we think that they are.
What is one thing you would like those watching this film to take away from this film? What do you want us to learn here?
To say that people with disabilities are just you and I. And also, most importantly, that we are just a moment from disability. A number of people that I spoke about two women whose stories are kind of very unfortunate. At one point, they could see, and then the next point, they can't see. So it could be you lose your sight in a moment. So disability is not like something that we need to look down upon. It's something that we should embrace as a society. And disability is not inability. Disability doesn't mean poverty. Like I mentioned, a number of guys, and even a lady called Stabile. Stabile is blind. She could see, but then she became suddenly blind. But Stabile uses her hands to generate income. She looks after her family. She cooks for her family. So I think with the right support, people with disabilities are people who can just look after themselves. They have skills, they have mental capacities, they have ideas, they have dreams. I think the idea around this film is that we need to look at people with disabilities and authenticate their dreams. They have dreams just like you and I, and we need to support the same dreams that they have just like everybody else.
How has this film been received in Zimbabwe?
I think people are learning from it. People are learning that we need to embrace disability. We need to come out of stigma. You know, a number of people hide their children with disabilities behind the door. It's an embarrassment sometimes that they feel it's an embarrassment to society. And also sometimes society doesn't make it easier for children or people with children or people with disabilities. So I think it's beginning conversations, but not only in Zimbabwe, Esther, but also across the world. I had an opportunity to tour, just to have a little tour in the United States, in Maryland, as well as in Wisconsin a few weeks ago. It's really, you know, starting conversations about disabilities, about what can we do to really just support people.
Nyari, that was a brilliant idea. I'm really touched by that, and I hope people are listening. Thank you so much, Nyari.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Nyerazo Nyari Mashaya Mombe is a human rights and women rights advocate and storyteller in Zimbabwe. And that's our show for today. We thank you for joining us on Africa 55.